Hi, everybody. I'm Ethan Kerr, recording from the Millersville University Weather Center for Millersville's Weather Watch, talking about the severe weather and tornado threat ongoing today, April 4th, in parts of Arkansas and Texas, as part of this kind of multi-day severe weather episode. So, getting right into it, you can see the Storm Prediction Center has issued a moderate risk for severe thunderstorms today, and that's being driven by 15% hatched risk for tornadoes across much of northwest and central Arkansas and down into northeast Texas, and adjacent parts of extreme southeastern Oklahoma and extreme southern Missouri. And then that tornado threat also extending to the east, northeast into parts of Kentucky and surrounding states. So another high threat for tornadoes in Arkansas, which has kind of been under the gun for severe weather a lot in the past month or so. Were part of a violent tornado outbreak on March 14th, and then just 2 days ago they had that high risk for severe weather with some strong damaging tornadoes moving through the state. So they just can't catch a break right there. Taking a look at what's kind of causing all of this, as you can see here, looking at the 500 millibar winds, see there's this deep trough in the western U.S., and there's kind of this speed max, these higher winds that are kind of strengthening and then lifting northward. And then the warm sector, where all the warm unstable air is kind of in the southeast side of that. So it's in the right entrance region of this higher flow, which is kind of a favorable area for lifts. And oftentimes in that area, you can get the formation of a surface low and fronts along with it to start to trigger storms. And that's what's going on here. If you look at the surface analysis, there's a weak surface low forming kind of along this boundary that's been sagged across the southeastern U.S. for a while now. And the surface low forming along it, that's lifting the warm front northward through Arkansas and towards southern Missouri. And then you're getting storms firing along the boundary to the south. And taking a look at radar to show what that looks like, you can see we have a bunch of supercells that have kind of erupted into northeast Texas along that boundary. And you can see if I turn on the warnings here, there's a lot of tornado warnings with these storms. So they have some heightened tornado potential. In fact, there was just earlier what looked like a pretty strong tornado in the Clarksville, Texas area. So that was up here with that storm. The one limiting factor, because I'll get into what the parameters look like in a minute, and they look extremely favorable for tornadoes and potentially some strong ones. But the one thing that prevented the Storm Prediction Center from going with a high risk today was the potential for maybe an unfavorable storm mode. So what I mean by that is we have these supercells that are firing along the frontal boundary, but you can see they're kind of moving parallel to the orientation they're initiating along the boundary. So they're not perfectly training, but there's a very high boundary parallel component to where they're moving. So if they were moving more perpendicular, they'd be able to stay discrete a little bit better. But since they're moving parallel, you kind of get one storm interfering with the storm north of it. The forward flank of the one supercell pushes into the supercell to the north of it. And sometimes that can be a good thing, but it can also be too much of a good thing. It becomes an unfavorable thing for tornado production. And I think that's why so far we've seen a lot of these circulations been getting undercut by these big surges of RFD, or rear flank downdraft. But nonetheless, we have had at least one, probably a couple of tornadoes so far, including what looked like a pretty strong cone tornado with horizontal vortices in the Clarksville, Texas area. So taking a look at the meso-analysis to show the kind of extreme environment we have going on here, this is the mixed layer CAPE, and you can see we have values over 3,000 out ahead of that front in northeast Texas, into Louisiana, and much of Arkansas. If I do like a point and click sounding here, and you can see the skew T, you can see just that extreme CAPE there, and then the hodograph looks very favorable too. Taking a look at the wind shear, here's the lowest level storm relative felicity. So this is 0 to 500, and you can see values over 100, which is kind of favorable for tornadoes. It's probably good enough. Um, you can see the strongest low-level wind shear is more focused to the north, up north of that warm front, where we have the best shear right now. To the south of the warm front, there's still enough shear for tornadoes. Not quite as high as we saw like 2 days ago with that high risk level, but still enough to produce strong tornadoes with any discrete supercells that get going. Here's a photograph I just pulled south of Little Rock, and you can see that kind of sickle shape to it. And then in the lowest levels, you can see a lot of that's very streamwise. So you look at the storm motion there, and you can see the storm relative inflow for that lowest layer is pretty perpendicular to the shear vector. So if you drew a line from the storm motion back to the photograph, it's very perpendicular to the wind shear in this lowest level, which would just be the line from here to, say, up here. And that means the inflow is parallel to the vorticity at that level, because the vorticity will be perpendicular to that wind shear. So you're getting very parallel storm relative inflow to the vorticity rolls in the atmosphere, and that'll help those storms ingest that spin very readily and strengthen mesocyclones and be able to be more favorable for tornadoes. So again, the environment is very juiced up, especially with the instability, and the wind shear probably good enough for strong tornadoes. The one thing is going to be the issue of storm mode. I will say, if I go back to radar, it's not just going to be the storms along this boundary here. We're going to have other areas for potential storms as well. If you look at the radar in Arkansas, you can see these storms kind of firing in southwestern Arkansas along some sort of prefrontal boundary here, some sort of prefrontal trough or something firing off that little line of storms out ahead of it. And that's the type of thing that could become a threat for more discrete supercells that maybe have less of an issue with sloppy storm mode. So that'll have to be watched northwest Louisiana into southwest Arkansas if any discrete supercells can get going along there. Looking at the surface here, I'm wondering if they might have initiated along this kind of sharper gradient here in temperature and dew point in northwest Louisiana into southwest Arkansas, because there have been some storms trying to fire up in that zone right there for a little while now, and eventually those could become a problem with significant tornadoes. Taking a look, see what else to look at. There are other severe threats today as well. There is a wind threat, especially up north into Missouri, parts of Arkansas, Kentucky. If I take a look, let me go to the models real quick. Pull up pivotal weather here. You can see, I'll just go to the HER, and I'll zoom in on the Ohio Valley, and then I'll just go straight to the simulated reflectivity to show you kind of what's going on here. We have that threat of supercells in northeast Texas moving into Arkansas, and then we'll see if anything can form out ahead of them. You can see the HER kind of does that into like central Arkansas here, and that would be another potential corridor for strong tornadoes. But you can see how into Missouri, you might have an embedded tornado threat up there, but you also have probably the highest damaging wind threat there. You can see how this kind of turns into a line, and even like a bow echo as things go upscale, and you could have a real high damaging wind threat into that area. And you can even have some of these discrete supercells like, and there actually is one right where the HER has this out in Kentucky, to have that potential large hail threat, isolated tornado threat, and damaging wind threat. And then any big supercells that get going down here into Arkansas and even into northeast Texas could also have a higher hail threat as well. So a lot of things going on today, and that's not the end of it. If you look at the day 2 outlook, there's another enhanced risk with an enhanced risk of tornadoes into parts of Louisiana and Arkansas again, and also enhanced risks for wind and hail. So the severe threat continues tomorrow. And then the other thing that can't be overlooked is the flood threat. It's been raining in Arkansas for the past 2 days. Yesterday they had storms. The day before there was the tornado outbreak. More rain today, so a high risk of flooding centered over Arkansas and parts of Missouri and Oklahoma today. And then tomorrow the high risk continues over Arkansas and extends out to the east. So also very high risk of flooding and flash flooding with these kind of repeated rounds of storms. You look at this is the European model. You see the storms today, and the storms continue tomorrow. Widespread rain tomorrow morning, and it's tomorrow afternoon with more storms, and then things finally kind of clear out by Sunday. So the severe weather continues, the flood threat continues, and the tornado threat continues. But I think that's about everything. I think I covered about everything. So that'll do it for this edition of Weather Watch. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. There's some interesting weather going on.